The doors did not slam. That was the worst part. They closed quietly, softly, almost politely, and the woman standing on the other side of them did not make a sound. Her name was Adaeze. Not the Adaeze inside the hall, not any of the women in their silk and pearls and freshly pressed hair. The Adaeze outside. The one in the yellow dress she had ironed 3 times that morning because she did not own another one. The one holding a covered pot, wrapped in a cloth that used to be a curtain, because she had not found a proper carrying bag in time. And she was not about to show up to her daughter's wedding empty-handed. She had taken the 6 a.m. bus from Brampton. She had woken at 4 to start cooking. She had made egusi soup, the real kind, the kind that takes hours, because her daughter Chiamaka always said, "Mama, nobody makes it like you." She thought that still counted for something. She was wrong. The guard at the door was a young man, maybe 23, in a rented suit that was slightly too big for his shoulders. He looked at Adaeze with the specific kind of embarrassment that people wear when they are doing something they know is wrong, but have been told to do anyway. He said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but the guest list is finalized." Adaeze told him her name. He looked down at his clipboard. He looked up. He said, "I'm sorry, ma'am." And then someone inside, someone she couldn't see, reached past him and pulled the door shut. Not slammed, pulled, carefully. The way you close a door when you don't want to cause a scene. Adaeze stood on those front steps for a long time. Long enough for the autumn cold to settle into her shoulders. Long enough for 2 of the catering staff to pass her without making eye contact. Long enough for her to consider, twice, simply leaving. She didn't leave. She sat down on the top step, set the pot of egusi beside her, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for. Maybe for someone to open the door and say there's been a mistake. Maybe for her daughter to come looking. Maybe for nothing at all. Inside, 340 guests were sitting in gold chairs underneath crystal chandeliers in a ballroom in downtown Toronto, and none of them knew that the mother of the bride was eating alone outside in a yellow dress that had been ironed 3 times. Her daughter Chiamaka had always been extraordinary. Not in the easy way, not the way of people who are handed things. In the hard way. The way that comes from a mother who works double shifts at a packaging plant and still has dinner on the table by 7. The way that comes from doing homework at the kitchen table while the upstairs neighbors fight and the radiator knocks, and the only quiet in the apartment is the quiet you make inside your own head. Chiamaka had been the first in her family, first in the whole extended family, uncles and aunts and cousins counted, to finish university. She had done it in 3 years, not 4, because she was working at the same time and couldn't afford a 4th year's tuition. She had cried the night she got her acceptance into the master's program, not out of joy, out of relief. The specific kind of relief that only people who have been afraid for a very long time know how to cry. Adaeze had stood in the doorway of Chiamaka's room that night, watching her daughter cry, and she had not said a word, because some things are too big for words, and also because she was crying too, and she did not want Chiamaka to hear it. She had come to Canada from Enugu, Nigeria, in 1999, with 2 suitcases and a cousin's address on a piece of paper. She had spent the first winter in a basement apartment in Scarborough, where the windows frosted over from the inside. She had cleaned offices, sorted mail, worked a cash register, and eventually, after 3 years and 2 different night classes, gotten a job at the packaging plant that paid enough, barely, always barely, to make a life. She raised Chiamaka in that life, not despite it, inside it. She taught her daughter that there was no version of enough that came from anyone else's hands, that the soup you make yourself always tastes better than the soup you are given, that you greet people by looking at them, not past them, that you do not leave a room without leaving something good behind in it. These were not lessons she sat down and delivered. They were just the way she moved through the world. And Chiamaka watched and learned and became someone extraordinary. The man Chiamaka was marrying was named Broderick Fenwick. His family was from Halifax originally, several generations back on one side and Manitoba on the other. His father was a retired civil engineer. His mother, Margot Fenwick, organized charity galas and sat on two boards and had opinions about table linens that she expressed with the confidence of someone issuing policy. Broderick himself was, by most honest measures, a decent man. He loved Chiamaka. He said so often, and in the moments that mattered, he showed it too. He learned to make jollof rice from a YouTube video because it was Chiamaka's comfort food. He flew with her to Enugu the year her uncle died, even though he had a major presentation that week. He told his mother, more than once, that Chiamaka was the smartest person he had ever met, and if she found that intimidating, that was something she would need to work through on her own. But there were things Broderick did not do well with conflict. There were things he let slide to avoid a larger argument. There were compromises he made without fully understanding what he had agreed to. One of those compromises had to do with the wedding. Margot Fenwick had taken over the planning 6 months in. Not aggressively, gradually, the way certain people accumulate authority, by filling every available silence with a decision. The venue was her suggestion. The florist was her suggestion. The guest list, she said, was getting a little unwieldy, and perhaps they should think about who really needs to be there versus who it would be nice to have there. And somehow in that conversation, Adaeze's name ended up on the wrong side of that distinction. Chiamaka did not know. That is the part that matters. She did not know her mother had been taken off the final list. She had given Broderick's mother her mother's name and assumed it was handled. Broderick had assumed the same. Margot had nodded and said of course, and then not added the name, because she had decided, somewhere in the neat private logic of her own mind, that Adaeze, arriving in whatever she chose to wear, would be something she would rather not have to manage on a day she had spent 14 months arranging. She did not think of herself as a cruel woman. She thought of herself as a practical one. Broderick noticed 20 minutes into the reception cocktail hour that his mother had a look on her face that she usually only wore after she had made a unilateral decision about something. He found her near the bar, talking to one of the women from her board, and he waited until that conversation was over, and then he asked her, quietly, if everything was all right. Margot said everything was beautiful. She said the lilies were better than she'd hoped. Broderick said, Mama Adaeze isn't here yet. Margot picked up her champagne flute and looked at something across the room and said, Chia's mother wasn't on the final list, darling. Broderick was quiet for a moment. What do you mean she wasn't on the list? The list was finalized last month. She's the mother of the bride. I know who she is, Broderick, still looking at something across the room. He put down his own drink. He looked at his mother for a long time. The kind of look that is not anger yet, but is the room anger lives in before it arrives. Then he turned and walked to the front of the ballroom, where the ceremony coordinator was standing with a tablet and an earpiece, and he said quietly, so no one around him could hear, Where is Chiamaka's mother? The coordinator looked at her tablet, looked up, said, Sir, she arrived about 40 minutes ago, but she wasn't on the... Broderick was already moving. He pushed through the main doors, and the cold air hit him, the way cold air hits you when you've been in a heated room too long, suddenly, completely, like stepping into a different world. Adaeze was sitting on the top step with the pot of egusi beside her. She had her coat over her lap now, not on, just over her lap, the way you do when you're not sure if you're staying or going. She looked up when the door opened. She did not look angry. That was the first thing Broderick saw. She looked tired in the way that has nothing to do with sleep. She looked like a woman who had spent a long time expecting less than she was owed, and had gotten so good at it that even this, had not surprised her completely. Broderick sat down on the step beside her. He was wearing his suit, the one that had been fitted 3 times, the one that cost more than Adaeze made in a month. He sat on the cold concrete in that suit, and he looked at the street, and he didn't say anything right away. "It's cold out here," he finally said. "It is," Adaeze said. "I'm sorry." 2 words. He meant them the way you can only mean something when you are fully aware of how insufficient the words are. Adaeze looked at him. "How long has she been here?" she asked, meaning Chiamaka. "She's inside. She doesn't know." Adaeze nodded slowly. "She made you a good husband," she said. "My daughter. She made you." She wasn't being unkind. She was stating something she believed was simply true. Broderick said, "Yes, ma'am, don't let her be ashamed of where she came from. Even when it's inconvenient, don't let her be ashamed of me." Broderick stood up. He held out his hand. "Come inside," he said. "Please." What happened next was this. Broderick walked back into the ballroom with Adaeze beside him. Not behind him, beside him. He walked her through 340 guests and past his mother, who went very still, and up to where Chiamaka was standing near the head table talking to one of her bridesmaids. Chiamaka turned. For a moment, she just looked at her mother, and Adaeze looked back, and the whole conversation they'd been having for 30 years, every sacrifice, every early morning, every bowl of soup left covered on the stove, for when she got home, was in that look, and neither of them said a word. Then Chiamaka said, "Mama, why are you?" and stopped. She looked at Broderick. Why was she outside? The room had gone quieter around them, not silent. The music was still playing, but the kind of quiet that happens when enough people in a room understand that something real is occurring. Broderick said, "My mother made a mistake. I should have caught it. I didn't. I'm sorry." He said it loudly enough that Margot, 40 feet away, could hear it. Margot set down her champagne. Before the ceremony, when the guests were all seated and the string quartet was warming up and the coordinator was doing the final checks, Broderick stood up and asked for a moment. People thought he was going to make a toast. Men always make toasts before weddings in the movies, so everyone smiled and assumed that's what this was. He said, "Before we begin, I need to say something. And I'm going to say it here, in front of everyone, because the person I'm saying it to deserves to hear it in front of everyone." He looked at Adaeze, who was seated in the front row. Someone had found her a chair, the best chair, actually, the one that had been reserved for Margot's sister who had canceled at the last minute. "This woman," he said, "came to Canada with nothing and built everything. Not everything she has. Everything this family has. She is the reason the woman I love exists. She is the reason Chiamaka knows who she is and what she's worth and what she will and will not accept. She taught her daughter that with her hands, with her hours, with the meals she made at 5 in the morning before a double shift, with the way she held her head, in rooms that were not designed for her." He paused. "Someone tried to keep her out of this room today. That will not happen again. Not at this wedding, and not ever. She sits in the front. She is not a footnote. She is the whole reason we're here." The string quartet had stopped playing. Someone in the back started clapping, then more. Then the whole room, which is the kind of thing you think only happens in movies, but actually happens sometimes when enough truth has been put into a room at once. Adaeze did not cry. She looked at her hands. She pressed her lips together, and then she looked up at Broderick and gave him the smallest nod. The kind of nod that is not a thank you. Exactly, but an acknowledgement that a thing has been done right, and she sees it, and she will not forget it. Margot Fenwick did not leave the wedding. She sat through the ceremony and the dinner and the first dance. She ate the egusi soup that Adaeze's pot turned into when the catering staff offered to heat it and serve it as an additional course, because Broderick had asked them to, because he had opened the pot on the front steps and smelled it and said this needs to be on the table. 340 guests had a small bowl of it. Half of them had never eaten anything like it. The card on each bowl said, Mama Adaeze's egusi, made this morning, the real kind. Margot ate hers. She finished it. She did not say anything about it to anyone at her table. But at the end of the evening, when the room was thinning out, and Adaeze was near the exit talking to one of Chiamaka's aunts who had driven in from Mississauga, Margot walked over. She stopped about 3 feet away, as if she hadn't fully committed yet to the full distance. She said, "The soup was good." Adaeze looked at her. "I know," she said simply. Margot said, "I owe you an apology." Adaeze let that sit in the air for a moment. She was not going to make it easy. She was not going to say it's fine or don't worry about it, because it was not fine and Margot should worry about it, a little, for some time. "You do," Adaeze said. "And I'll accept it when it comes properly." Margot nodded. It was the nod of a woman who had spent a long time being the most important person in every room, encountering for the first time someone who was not impressed by that. It was uncomfortable, and it was exactly right. Late in the evening, Chiamaka found her mother at a table near the back, shoes off the yellow dress, catching the light from the candles on the table. She sat down beside her. They watched the dance floor for a while. Cousins and old friends from university and 2 of Broderick's uncles, who had loosened up considerably after the open bar. "Did you know?" Chiamaka asked, before Broderick came out. "Did you know I didn't know?" "I didn't know," Adaeze said. "I thought maybe you were busy. Maybe they had put me in a different section. Mama, I sat outside for 45 minutes, my love. I was not going to make it about me." Chiamaka looked at her mother, the way adults look at their parents when they understand, maybe for the first time, the full weight of what that person has carried. Not with pity, with a specific, sober kind of love that has been stripped of all its easy parts. "You should have called me," Chiamaka said. "And said what? Come outside and tell your new mother-in-law she was wrong on your wedding day." Adaeze shook her head. "Some things are not for me to fix, baby. Some things have to be fixed by the people who broke them." Chiamaka reached over and took her mother's hand. Adaeze's hands were not soft. They had never been soft. They were the hands of a woman who had spent 25 years turning hard things into good ones, and they felt, in that moment, like the most solid thing in the room. "I love you, Mama. I know," Adaeze said. "You always have. Even when you forgot to call, even when you were too busy, I always knew." Before we close this story, I want to ask you something. When was the last time you looked at your mother's hands? Really looked? Not in passing. Not in the middle of something else. When did you last look at the person who made your whole life possible and actually see what it cost them? Adaeze sat on those cold, concrete steps for 45 minutes, with a pot of egusi she'd started at 4 in the morning, and she did not call her daughter. She did not cause a scene. She waited, the way she had always waited, with the quiet patience of a woman who has learned that her worth is not determined by who lets her through the door. But here is the truth. She should not have had to wait. None of them should. If this story moved you, if you saw your mother in Adaeze, or your grandmother, or yourself, drop where you're watching from in the comments. Let us know you were here. And if you haven't called home in a while, this is your sign. Subscribe if you're new to ancient African folk tales. We'll be right here, telling the stories that don't get told enough.